Ever find yourself just stuck on a moral dilemma, like really stuck? Today, we're tackling one of those stories, the one with Abraham and Isaac. But get this, we're going through it with Søren Kierkegaard, the philosopher. He really flips the script in Fear and Trembling.
Yeah, Kierkegaard, he doesn't want us to just breeze through this like it's some old story in the Bible. He wants us in it, feeling what Abraham's going through. He starts us off with this scene, like imagine a preacher, right? He's praising Abraham, how he's willing to sacrifice Isaac. Then, bam, someone in the congregation, they're feeling super inspired, a little too inspired, and they're like, I want to do that too.
Oh, hold up. What does the preacher even do with that?
Oh man, he totally loses it. Calls the parishioner a monster, the whole 9 yards. It's actually brilliant though, because it shows just how messed up, how paradoxical this whole story is.
Okay, so you're saying this isn't just some ancient history lesson. This whole dilemma, the struggle Abraham had, it's something we're still dealing with today.
100%. Kierkegaard wants us to get past those easy answers.
Yeah.
He wants us to really feel the weight of that dread that Abraham must have felt.
Let's talk about that dread. Kierkegaard's clear that Abraham, he really loved Isaac. He even calls him the best. This wasn't just some on-a-whim decision for Abraham.
Exactly. Kierkegaard, he's pointing that out on purpose.
Ah,
Because Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac, it wasn't because he didn't love him. It's almost like there was something else, something bigger, something more important that could even make him think about doing something like that.
So we're not talking about your typical sacrifice for the greater good type of story here, like those Greek tragedies.
Nope. This isn't Agamemnon sacrificing Iphigenia so he can win a war. It's not Jephthah with his daughter, even though it breaks his heart because of his sense of duty. And it's not like Brutus holding up the Roman law and condemning his own son for it. All tragic, for sure. But they're all acting out of obligation to the state, to like a social contract.
And Abraham's sacrifice, that was different.
Night and day, this was like intensely personal between him and God. The text even calls it, get this, a trial, a temptation.
A temptation. But, shouldn't we able to understand an act of faith that big, that monumental? Like, shouldn't it fit into our normal ideas of wrong and right?
And here's where it gets really wild. Because Kierkegaard says what Abraham does, it goes way beyond our typical ethics. He calls it a leap of faith, like completely stepping outside of what we can reason through. Almost like this story, it has this divine attachment. That's the only way to explain it.
Hold on, you're saying there's something about this story that we just can't wrap our heads around. Can you say more about that?
It's kind of like explaining, I don't know, color to someone who's never been able to see. You just run out of words. But in that space, that place beyond our understanding, that's where a real encounter with the divine might just be possible.
So faith, it's in its own category then. It's not about logic, following the rules. It's something else.
Exactly. It's about the individual, putting their relationship with God above everything else, even ethics. That's the paradox. And Kierkegaard, he says it straight up. It's inaccessible to thought, meaning we can't get it, not fully, not through reason alone.
No wonder philosophers and theologians have been going back and forth on this for centuries. But let's talk about something else that really stands out in this story. Abraham's silence. He doesn't explain himself. Not to Sarah, not even to Isaac. What's that about? Why is that so important?
For Kierkegaard, silence.
Yeah.
It's huge. He says it can either be like the snare of the demon or mutual understanding between deity and individual.
Okay, and that's a lot to unpack, and we'll do just that right after we come back. So, silence. It's more than just not making a sound for Kierkegaard. What's he getting at with Abraham's story?
It's like this silence for Kierkegaard. It's not about just keeping your mouth shut. It's more about how words, they can only go so far, especially with something as huge as faith. Yeah. Abraham, you can't explain what he's doing with logic, so silence, it's what he's left with.
So it's not about keeping secrets then, it's more like faith is something that goes beyond words.
Exactly. Think about a time you had to make a really tough choice, like your head saying one thing, but your gut saying something else. That struggle inside you, that's what Abraham's dealing with, but like times 1,000. And sometimes words, they just don't cut it.
I get that. And then there's that line right before it's supposed to happen. Abraham tells Isaac, God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. What do we make of that? Is he lying? Is he talking in some kind of code?
Man, this is where it gets good. Kierkegaard, he sees this as, get this, the double movement of faith. So on the one hand, you have infinite resignation. You accept God's will no matter what, even if it means losing what you love most in the world.
Okay, so no denying what's happening. But what's the other half of this double movement?
It's believing in the impossible. Like, really believing it. It's like Abraham, he knows how this looks, how tragic it could be, but he's holding on to this little piece of hope that God, he can work outside of, the way we think things work.
So he's prepared for the worst, but still hoping for a miracle.
Exactly. It's this crazy mix of like giving up everything, but still having radical hope. That's the knight of faith, as Kierkegaard calls him.
And the knight of faith, that's different from those tragic heroes we talked about.
Totally different. A tragic hero, they're all about the greater good, even if it costs them personally. But the knight of faith, they're on their own path. You can't explain their actions with logic, ethics, none of that. They're, like Kierkegaard says, an emigrant from the sphere of the universal.
So no cheering crowds for this knight, no statues or anything.
Probably not. Their faith, it just doesn't make sense to most people, maybe even discuss some. But that's the whole point. This isn't about getting the thumbs up from other people. It's about this crazy, intense, even absurd relationship with God.
Makes you wonder, can you even learn how to have that kind of faith? Could we ever be like Abraham? Can we even, choose to have that kind of faith?
That's the question, isn't it? The big one. And Kierkegaard's answer, well, might throw you for a loop. He says straight up, nobody can teach you how to have faith. It's not a skill you pick up or some feeling you can just, conjure up. It's way more than that. It's a struggle, a deep down personal one. You got to go through that infinite resignation thing we talked about. And then, only then, you can take that leap into the absurd. And you're always choosing it, even when it doesn't make a lick of sense.
So you can't fake it. Can't think your way into it. You got to go through the ringer, look that abyss right in the eye, and then you choose to believe.
Nailed it. And that's how Kierkegaard separates real faith, the real deal, from just some passing feeling. It's not about having those warm fuzzies. It's about choosing it every single time, even when it makes no logical sense. It's raw, it'll scare the pants off you, and it's yours, nobody else's.
This really gets you thinking, could we hack it, living in that space of radical faith like Abraham? Could we make those choices that fly in the face of reason, especially when we can't explain it to anyone? Or would we rather have that comfy, easy version of faith? The kind that doesn't ask for sacrifice. The kind without all that paradox and dread.
That's Kierkegaard's parting shot, that
Yeah.
question. And it's one that's echoed throughout time. It's a challenge to look inward at our own beliefs and what we hold on to. It asks us to define for ourselves what our relationship with something bigger really means.
Definitely gives us all something to chew on. Really appreciate you joining me for this deep dive into, the paradox that is Abraham.
Always a pleasure. And until next time, keep those big questions coming.